the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance
Allegiance to the flag of the United States of America
and
and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible,
with liberty
and justice for all.
All right. I'll entertain next items. I'll entertain a motion to approve the agenda for tonight's meeting.
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
Okay. Any discussion? Seeing none, I'll call the question. All those in favor of approving the agenda as presented, please say aye by roll call. Myself, yes. Steve?
Yes.
Larry?
Yes.
Cammie?
Yes.
Tom?
Yes.
Frank?
Yes.
Yes.
All right. All right. Next item on the agenda is President's comments. Couple of things. Number one, the notion for tonight's meeting is this discussion to talk about the ever-changing and developing situation here with this payment protection program loan. We've had a number of meetings with our attorneys. We've had a number of meetings with, excuse me, can whoever's got that background noise, can you please put your microphone on mute? Okay, unfortunately, I had to just mute everybody in the meeting so that we don't get all that background noise. So when you get ready to talk again, please unmute your microphone. Directors only, please. We're talking about the loan. We talked to our attorneys, including the tax attorney from Lurch, Early & Brewer on multiple occasions. We've talked to the Bank of Ocean City on multiple occasions. We are fine with regard to our approach, but with this ever-changing situation, we felt it prudent to continue these discussions to make sure we've covered every specific aspect of the topic regarding this. I think we're fine, but we still want to make sure we do the due diligence. So hence the discussion for this evening. Another item that I wanted to bring up is as of close of business yesterday, which was the candidate deadline. So there were no more candidates that applied to run for the board. Therefore, under section 5.02E, we have to solicit input from the community to see if we can get another candidate for the board. You have to have two more than the available seats for the upcoming election. We have 2 seats open, and therefore we've only got 3 candidates at this point. We're going to have to solicit for a 4th or perhaps more candidates for the election. As I am running again, I am going to recuse myself from the process. I have asked our Vice President, Steve Tuttle, to step in and lead the effort to ask around and try to make sure that the board is doing its required duties with regard to the bylaws on soliciting other candidates for the board. I believe we have until the first Friday of July to finish that process so that the final information can get to the printer for the ballots and the upcoming election. So Steve, thank you very much. Steve will be leading that effort, and anybody that has any information regarding who might want to also step in and be a candidate for the upcoming election, please contact Steve Tuttle. That in mind, that's all I have with regard to the president's remarks, and I'll open the floor for public comments. If you have a public comment, just unmute your microphone. Let's be courteous of one another as we would, the tendency is to talk over people, but I just want to make sure we manage it properly. So again, the floor is open for public comments, and please be advised that public comments, since this is a special meeting, can only deal with the topic on the agenda, or the 2 topics on the agenda. So by all means, the floor is open for public comments. For those of you who wanted to make a public comment, just a reminder, I muted everybody. So if you wanted to make a public comment, please unmute your microphone and you'll be able to speak. Okay, seeing no public comments, we'll close that part of the agenda and move on to the next item, and that is new business. The first item under new business is a motion for temporary powers to the general manager. Frank.
Okay. The topic, temporary power of the general manager to apply to state, federal, and county programs while the state of Maryland is under the declaration of state of emergency and existence of catastrophic health emergency COVID-19 and its extensions. What the motion will do is the effect of this is to assure timely response to programs available to the association during the current state of emergency. The background is during the current crisis, programs have been developed by government agencies that require fast action to ensure the enrollment of the association in these programs. During these fast-moving times, this motion will permit the GM to act on these programs prior to formal board meeting, providing all directors are notified via email when such action is taken.
Is there a second?
Second.
Okay, discussion.
Okay, can I start, Doug?
Please, Frank, go ahead.
Okay, the reason I did this, two things. Number one, let me just speak first as a small business owner, okay? And having gone through these programs and the kind of portraiture that the programs when they come out is we want to help you, we want to do it fast, we want to get money in your hands. It's an uncomplicated thing. Come and apply, and your application will be handled expeditiously. The truth of the matter couldn't be further. Okay, millions of people apply. There's a tremendous choke neck, and loan officers, being loan officers, deal with their biggest clients first. So where you're at on the pecking order depends on how much attention, in fact, that you get. And if you wait, as we found out in the last program, it's out of money within 72 hours. So moving expeditiously, if you look at the past as a guide to what's going to happen in the future, if these programs come out, it's just the timing that's required for us, and the timing of the programs just is not going to be in sync. Now, speaking as a board person, okay, certainly we received some negative comments as a board because we didn't go into a formal board meeting to approve the application to the Paycheck Protection Plan. And the reason is it same reason I just outlined as a small business person. It just happened so fast. So I don't know that we're going to have another program. I don't know that it's going to roll out exactly the same. But if it does, I want the board to express to John that we have his back in applying for it, providing that, in fact, he notifies us via email when he's doing so.
Discussion.
Frank, you know, I understand what you're trying to do, and I think it's, you know, I can see it's based on the reaction of what we got from, you know, what we did here with the PPP. But I got to tell you, I don't think it's necessary, and I think I'm not even sure, according to our bylaws, if we can go ahead and do that. So I think it might be a little overreaction. I think John, after what we just went through, I think John will keep us all abreast. And quite honestly, he kept Doug and I abreast, and I don't think there was any issue with John communicating. It probably choked at Doug and I. So I don't know if we really need this, Frank, to be honest with you.
Yeah,
Mr. Chairman.
I would like to underscore what Larry
Doug.
said.
All right, hold on. Steve and then Cammie.
Okay,
Steve,
sorry.
go ahead.
Thank you. I don't really see it needed. I think that even with the last process, we were notified on April 2nd that a work group was put together, and then Doug and Larry were kept abreast of what was going on with that, and the action was taken fast. I think with the email capabilities we have, we can respond quickly to any need that comes up. So I really don't see the need for this motion.
Cammie, was that you that wanted to go next?
Yeah, it was. I
Can't hear you.
who's involved in this
Yeah.
is kept informed.
Can't hear you, Cammie.
You're coming in and out.
Okay, I'm sorry. Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Okay.
Now you're frozen.
Uh-oh.
You better get better
Manner
internet.
as we possibly can. So, while I feel very good about empowering him to do what he needs to do so it's timely, I ask and do support the notion that if we don't pass this motion, that we count on John as a general manager to keep us availed of any information in a timely basis.
Thanks. Other discussion?
Yeah, I have to tend to agree with Larry and Steve in that, we went through this as soon as it was available. We got email notification that it was happening and we were going forward. We knew who we were talking to, our attorneys and the bank. I don't see that this motion is needed. If we continue to go, and this thing could be over without any more funding in 2 weeks. We don't know. I just think that we don't need it. The way it worked this time, I think, was sufficient and efficient for all of the board members to know that we were all on the same page with what was going on. And I just don't see a need for the motion.
I will weigh in also to say that I don't think we need it, but I will second what Cammie said, that if there is another initiative, that the board be fully apprised by whatever officers are involved in working with John on, whatever initiative that comes up. I think it's paramount that we all be fully informed.
All right. Well, since everyone else has talked, I want to make a comment too. Number one, first of all, Frank, thanks for bringing the motion up. I'm glad we're socializing this publicly. So it shows that the membership that we're thinking about these kinds of things, we're learning, it's kind of a lessons learned kind of thing to make sure we stay on top of the particular issues. Quite frankly, I don't think it's needed for a couple of reasons. Number one, there's nothing preventing John from applying for a loan, from looking, for gathering information. Okay. There's really, as a matter of fact, that's probably what he should be doing, looking at options, looking at alternatives for us to, conduct our business. The thing that where the board comes in is when a decision on funding becomes an issue. John, by the bylaws and everything, or any GM, doesn't have the authority. So we have the control mechanisms in place to make any decisions on expending association funds to move forward with something. I think that this situation, while it's good that it's in the public eye, it's good that we've talked about it, but quite frankly, I think with the powers that are vested to the GM that are currently in bylaw section, I think it's 902, E or something, or C, that he's operating within the tenets of that particular section of the bylaws. And while I think it's important that we do that, communication can do the same thing. Frank, I do appreciate you bringing the emotion up, but I think there's a sentiment here that we're okay. But again, as I said earlier, I'm glad we brought it up for public discussion so people know that we're thinking about these kinds of things. Other discussion?
Yeah, if everybody feels that way, I'm just ambivalent. I just wanted John to know that he could move, and basically we had his back. But hearing the sentiment, I would more than gladly withdraw the motion.
Okay, so noted. And I think, again, going back to my comment that we discussed this publicly and everybody understands that we are in support of the processes, the things, the way John's running business, and we have the control mechanism in place. And so I think the benefit here is the fact that we had this conversation in public and that it's a good thing. So if you are withdrawing the motion, then Cammie, would you please record that the motion is being withdrawn and therefore we don't have to vote on it and we can move forward to the next item on the agenda. And that is an adjournment to public session. This is brought up by me to adjourn to a closed session for the purpose of consideration of terms and conditions of a business transaction in the negotiation stage. If the disclosure could adversely affect the economic interests of the homeowners association, specifically discussions of matters pertaining to employees and personnel is permitted by Maryland Homeowners Association Act Section 11B 111 4 7 and 4.1. I'm sorry, 4.6 and 4.1. Is there a second?
Second.
Any discussion?
Yeah, I just like to say I'm not in favor of going into closed session. I feel like the primary discussion is about the PPP loan. It's not about staffing or layoffs. If we get into that portion of the conversation, then I think we could go to closed session at that time. I feel like we owe it to our membership to allow them to hear and participate any way they want with the whole conversation around the PPP loan. So I'm not in favor of going into closed session.
Mr.
Other
Chairman,
discussion?
Yeah.
yes, I have given this considerable thought, and just, yesterday I spent most of the day exploring this whole thing. And I have to come down on the side with Frank. I do think that we owe it to our community to hear what our thoughts on the PPP are. And for reasons that I will state later, if this is determined to be the direction we go, I'll reserve my comments until a later time.
Other discussion?
Yeah, Doug, if I could, two things. One, if you look at the chat room on the meeting thing, Jay apparently came in late and asked a question. It doesn't pertain to the topic that we're discussing, so technically we don't have to answer it. But it would be nice to let him know that, since he did join the meeting and asked us a question. Secondly, and you can do that as the board chairman. Secondly, I don't agree with going to closed session to discuss this loan either. I don't think it's directly affecting our personnel. We're discussing whether we should or whether we shouldn't keep it, take it, done it, what or how we've done it. I don't think it, I know it's for payroll, but it doesn't directly affect payroll as the conversation. So that's my feeling.
Noted. Other discussion?
Yeah, I disagree.
I don't know.
I think that the discussions and decisions we're going to make here are going to directly impact our employees. And I don't think it's appropriate for us to have those discussions and then let the employees wonder what in fact is going to happen, and be concerned until the general manager, the board and the general manager have had a chance to really go through this.
Other discussion?
Yeah, and I'm gonna agree with Larry. I think it would be difficult for us to have a freewheeling discussion in open session about the alternatives that we face that are going to undoubtedly directly impact employees. And I would not want to trade the freewheeling nature of the discussion for transparency. I think transparency can come at the end of the meeting. We can fully disclose to the membership the decision we've made and the rationale for that decision at that point. So I'm going to agree with Larry on this.
Mr. Chairman, may I raise
Other
another
discussion,
issue?
Tammy?
Thank you. What I would like to see happen here is that we look at the merits of the PPP loan, and we as a board keep that in an open session, because I think a lot of our constituency wants to hear what we're thinking about the PPP loan. There has been a lot of chatter on various forums about the PPP loan and what our intention is. Colette, I agree with you that when we reach that decision, and if it reaches to a personnel issue where we may have to do things that directly affect personnel, at that point, I suggest we go into closed session. But I believe that a lot of people have a lot of curiosity about what the PPP loan means, and should we be giving it back? Should we keep it? Should we earmark it so it goes to somebody else? But I think that our constituency needs to be informed about what we're doing. And so I'll reserve on other comments until later.
Doug?
Other discussion?
Doug?
Doug, can I make a statement? It's John.
Hold on, John. Steve?
Doug, it's Frank.
Oh, Frank, go ahead. Sorry,
Frank
Frank.
over there.
Here's I'm kind of on the fence, because here's what I think would be very appropriate. I think that there's an issue of finances. I think that we should, in open session, discuss exactly where we are at in terms of this is what's coming in, this is what we see in terms of revenue, this is what we see in terms of expenses, and that kind of lets people have the view, because just when you come to reserves and start talking about reserves, there's a misconception that we have this huge amount of money that we're sitting on that we can just transfer like a magic wand over to cover what's happening because the economy is stopped, and that things will go on merrily on their way. Okay. So I think that in open session, we should just discuss where we're at, and then the reason we applied for the loans for any shortfall that we see, and then we can go into closed session to discuss what happens if we take the loan, what happens if we don't take the loan, because that is going to be a more freewheeling discussion. And quite honestly, depending on which way we go, we might get into some personnel issues that merit a closed session. But I think the financial condition of where we're at today, up to the point of making the decision on whether or not to accept the loan or not, should be an open session and before all the members of the association.
Discussion, John?
Thank you, Doug, and thank you, all directors. So let me make the comment. Whether you do it in closed session or not, that's obviously up to you. The one thing I'm going to ask, if you don't go into closed session, is this. Some of you, or many of you, have asked for, insisted on forecast, guesses into the future 12 months. Those numbers, companies aren't even giving those numbers. I ventured into that world. I gave it to you. There's assumptions. I just think if you have these numbers all over the place, it's going to cause more confusion. You can certainly talk about this loan and all the merits and all that, and maybe your cash position. I'm just asking that the forecast that you're asking for 12 months that I gave you with a ton of assumptions not be discussed now, because I just think it's going to be confusing. But if you do, I'll do it.
Other discussion?
Yeah. Listen, I don't have a problem with discussing the merits of the PPP loan and what we did in the application process, and whether or not we believe that we complied with what we needed to. But I have to tell you, I have to agree with John. I'm sitting here looking at a bunch of numbers that are based on the best set of assumptions that we could throw together. And the last thing I want to do, quite honestly, is put a bunch of numbers out that can open up John and Steve Phillips and the rest of us to criticism based on assumptions that, we're trying to give it a best guess so that this board can make a decision as to whether or not we keep the money or give it back. And I would suggest this also. I got a call from Greg Ellison earlier today, wanting about some other issues, but then also a little bit about what we were going to be talking about tonight. And I told Greg, I wouldn't discuss it, wouldn't talk about anything we had, but clearly I agree that after we make a decision, we need to let the community know how we based our decision. And I told Greg that with the board's permission, I would sit down and talk with him and try to go through with him the analysis that we looked at. So I understand transparency, but I think if we go through these statistics, these assumptions, I think we're going to create a lot of problem that we don't need. And quite honestly, the numbers we're going to talk about are going to have an impact on staffing. So I don't think this is the venue to put that out.
Thanks. Other discussion?
Can I go real quick?
Tom.
First off, there's not an employee in America that's not worried about losing their job. So I don't think us discussing employees losing their job is any big deal, even though we won't do that. Secondly, I assume this discussion that we were having about the PPP loan was whether we are still, our application was put through, from what I understand, under the regulations that were given us originally, and it was put through properly. And we did it with the intention of using it toward our payroll, which is what we were going to do, which is what we're going to do. Now, my understanding from the information we've bantered back and forth is there might be a problem with that. So I thought our discussion was going to be whether we are bound to that, whether we're legally bound to be able to keep this money or give it back. That was, I thought, was the discussion, plain and
Okay.
simple. Whether we kept it or
Doug,
we
may I talk? Doug, may I talk?
Yeah, and then I need to say something, so go
Go
ahead.
ahead.
So first of all, when I hear that now somebody thinks or just said that now there's something wrong with that information or those numbers, nobody ever said that. This is exactly why I have to tell you that when this kind of talk or something like that, we're just talking about forecast. I'll do it. I'll do it. In no way did anybody say that there was something wrong with the numbers on the application. But right there is what's going on here.
No, I didn't say anything about something.
Hold on, Tom.
Hold on. One at a time, please.
I know what I heard. We're talking about the forecast. If you want to talk about the application numbers, fine. I mean, I don't have them, but it's two separate items.
Yeah.
No,
All right.
I wasn't
People on this
discussing.
call wanted to know what the numbers are going to be 12 months from now or 6 months from now. Nobody's doing that. And you didn't need that for the application. I did it. I'm willing to go through it. All I'm saying is it could lend confusion because I don't have a crystal ball. I can't tell you when we're going to open, when we're not, if we're going to do 25%, 50%, 75%. We have the numbers to give you a feel. I don't know if the county is going to give us some money. Last week, I didn't think they were going to give us 600,000, 700,000. Today, I'm a lot more hopeful. I'm just saying there's a lot of assumptions in there in order to get what people ask for. I'm willing to do it. But I want to make it clear, and I think everybody has to make it clear. In no way what Larry or I said or anybody else said, now there's something wrong with the numbers on the application. I just need to make sure that's clear. That's all I'm saying.
John, forgive me. Hold on. I never said anything about the numbers, period. If you're insinuating that I said something about the numbers, I didn't. I was more talking about whether us as a nonprofit were allowed to get that loan. That's my question.
Okay, that's something different. Yeah, I agree.
That's completely different. I'm not asking about the numbers, the application, anything.
You know,
I just want to know whether us as a 501c4 is allowed to get that loan.
All right, stand by. All right, my turn. Number one, for those watching, listening, and for those who will see this at some point, the reason for the closed session was very clear. There are some speculative numbers that we're looking at to try to help us make a decision, and there will absolutely be some discussion on what would happen if these numbers are negative and we'd have to take some personnel issues. I will not, under any circumstances, in public discuss personnel issues due to Maryland law, period. Now, the second part of it is the fact that while I think it's important that the public know where we are right now, so I am more than happy to discuss the status of where we are, perhaps even a chronology or a historical reference on how we've gotten to this point, so it clears up any suspicion, any misinformation that's out there regarding this process. I think that's a conversation well warranted in public. However, I will not cross the line, nor will I endorse anybody crossing the line when it comes into, well, what if we have to lay off 27 different people and who will they be? That's not part of the conversation. That will add to confusion. It will add to apprehension. It will add to speculation, and we will end up doing things and spending energy on something that we didn't need to spend energy on because it's hypothetical and it's not factual at this point. So my suggestion, my recommendation to my colleagues is the following. Let's just go through while we're still under discussion. So from a parliamentary procedure perspective, while we're still under discussion, we could certainly go through some of the historical reference on the process and how we got here. And at that point, I believe we can finish the discussion and move into closed session. And that in and of itself would require an acceptance of the motion. But if you're amenable to that, the idea is let's have this quote unquote public discussion on where we are with the loan itself. So we make sure the membership is aware of all this. And then at one point we can stop that discussion. We'll finish it up and we can move into closed session to talk about these speculative numbers, these broad estimates and potential outcomes if we take one course versus another. We've been authorized for the loan, period. All right. As I said in my remarks earlier, the Bank of Ocean City, the Small Business Administration, our attorneys are all saying there is no issue with the numbers. There is no issue with the application. Our decision right now is to decide whether or not we want to keep the money and take a certain course of action or return the money and take a certain course of action. And it's that data that we have to have in order to make that decision. And there's a lot of what if scenarios in there, which include staffing, which I will not discuss in public. So let me ask my colleagues on the board, do you think sort of a retrospective look at where we are right now and a little bit of background information for the public regarding the status of the loan would be beneficial at this point and appease everybody with regard to wanting to be have a discussion in open session with regard to the PPP loan?
Mr.
Yeah, I
Chairman?
think that's.
Doug,
Yes, I
I
think
would
that would
fully
be-
support that.
Yes.
Having a summary of where we are, the pros and cons, how we got here. But I agree with you completely. When we get to the point of going beyond that retrospective discussion, we absolutely need to go into closed session.
All right, so just to remind everybody, we're still under the discussion on the motion that's on the floor. Well, at some point when this discussion is over, we'll need to vote on the motion on the floor to go into closed session. But let's take an approach. Let me start. I think there's a couple of things, and I'll talk at very high level, and then please everybody else, weigh in as you see fit. But as I said earlier, we qualify for the loan. We put in the application. Kudos to John and his staff for being upfront, being very quick to react, being very quick to assess the situation and understand that there might be an option for us to take a look at. It's not a money grab. It's a business decision on understanding how we can run our operations. And at the end of the day, it was an application that was put through the proper process with the accurate information that was viewed by and reviewed by the Small Business Administration, the attorneys there, and any other criteria process that they need to follow in order to approve the loan. The loan was approved. Soon thereafter, they actually pointed out that 501c4s were not eligible, although in discussions with both the Bank of Ocean City and our attorneys, it was noted that other HOAs had also been granted and approved this very same kind of loan. So again, a fluid situation, ever changing. It's developing on an hour-by-hour basis in some cases, and these are the kinds of things that are driving us to have these additional discussions to make sure that we are in the best possible position from a business perspective for running Ocean Pines. Now, one other comment here is that, as we go through there's going to be some decisions that have to be made with regard to how having a loan will affect our finances in the long run and how not having this money will affect our finances in the long run. Another driver was the fact that we have not received the full complement of our assessment dollars. So in the first couple of months here, we're running with a smaller cash flow. Second consideration is the fact that we've got amenities whose prime season, is coming up, and we may not be able to run our operation to take advantage of the potential revenue that usually comes with the amenities running in prime season based on the pandemic and the restrictions associated with it. So those are some of the issues that we have to consider. And, again, if it goes to, in additional questions with some of these speculative numbers, we really do have to get underneath the covers and understand what effect it's going to have both in the short term and the long term. So, other discussion.
Doug, would you speak to the issue of the replacement and capital reserve fund? I think there's been a lot of belief in the community that we can just dip into that money. We can use that money to run the operation as long as that's there. That's like the proverbial slush fund that Marty Clark has reminded us for years we don't have. And
Right.
I would like to clear up any misconceptions about that as a source of funding that we could use in lieu of any kind of support from the SBA PPP.
Yeah, and I'll start. I'll ask John to kind of fill in the blanks afterwards. So for those who don't know, we've got capital reserve and replacement reserve funds. Okay, by our bylaws, our governing documents, those funds are earmarked for specific parts of the association entity. Okay, it's not an operational reserve. It's not a rainy day fund. It's not a slush fund. We're required to carry a reserve fund to protect the assets that we have here in Ocean Pines. Therefore, both major and minor assets. And although in the past, and I think it was several years ago, it's not unprecedented to dip into the reserves to cover an emergency situation. Okay. However, that is frowned upon both from a financial perspective and from a bylaws, requirements perspective to do that. So the concept of us having millions at the bank sitting around doing nothing but gathering interest and waiting for a rainy day is inaccurate at best. We don't have free access to that money, and it is not earmarked for those kinds of things. So the operational environment is driven from the operational budget and not the reserve funding in order for us to run operations in Ocean Pines. John, can you fill in any more blanks?
Doug, let me go on.
All right, Larry.
Larry, if I could just do mine, I know you have the numbers and then you can go with the numbers. Let
All
me
right.
just add, and then you'll be a perfect fit at the end with the numbers, which I didn't take. So first, the reserves are earmarked. They're earmarked for replacement. They're earmarked for, some of it is for the construction. And when I'm done, Larry will give you the balances and tell you where it is, which he does every month. They're not operational. We don't have an operational fund. I know the board put something together that was small for new construction or whether, we don't have an operational fund or reserve. There's a difference between the reserves that are earmarked for replacement. When we have to buy furniture and everything else, forget about building more buildings or anything, or that money is needed for the daily operation. We use a lot of it every year. When Larry tells you how much is left there, you'll see how it all ties in. I mentioned that we don't have an operational reserve. If anything, it's negative, right? We're carrying. We had the $1.5 million, $1.6 million, which now I think down, and Larry will give you the numbers. We're down to about a negative 650. Negative 650. Now, we all have a surplus this year, hopefully. We cover a good piece of it. The percentages in those reserves that are already earmarked are lower than the reserve percentages set by BNF a year and a half ago, and that we all agreed on. They're below it. Larry and the finance team and me, we have a plan over 3 years to get back there. So we're already below it. Okay, Larry, it's set for you.
Yeah, look, first off, a couple things. Doug, you had mentioned where we are. We're down in assessments. So let me just update everyone so they know where we're at, since we've been talking about it. As of today, we've received about 60% of our assessment dollars in, and that's about that's $5,465,000 towards our goal of about $9.4 million. So it's about 60%. Now, we've been giving the projections on where we're going to be with the our reserve forecast all year long. Our projection at the end of April, which is the end of our fiscal year, we'll have about $3.2 million in the replacement reserve fund. Now, I got to tell you, I played golf with a guy the other day, and we were talking a little bit about the PPP, and he said, well, just take it out of reserves. We got $8 million in reserves. Well, no, we don't have $8 million in reserves. We have 3.2 at the end of the fiscal year. And when we get into talking about the numbers, the projections and assumptions, if we were to tap into this replacement reserve account, which I don't think is appropriate, we're going to have a problem. And I'll leave that the remainder of that for when we go into closed session. Now, John mentioned we've been paying off a deficit $1.3 million over the last couple of years from 1.6 from prior acting general managers period running this place. We're projecting this year somewhere between $500,000 to $550,000 surplus this year. We still have a deficit remaining off that 1.6 of about $650,000. The board, we agreed last year that we would pay $250,000 towards that deficit, you know, because you wanted to spread it out a couple years. Even if we take the remainder of our surplus this year, we're still going to have to pay back. We're still going to be short about $150,000. And I'll give one projection number just so this puts this into perspective for everybody. Our projection is that we could be looking at a deficit by July 1st of about $500,000. So this idea that we can take replacement reserve money and use it's just not going to fly. And I've said this to a couple of my fellow board members. For an organization that is over 50 years old, we should have an operational reserve account. Now, we went ahead and took the steps this year and did a new capital reserve account, and people talked about it being a slush fund. Well, here we are in this situation we are today, and the same people that criticized us setting that account up as a slush fund are looking at our replacement reserve account as a slush fund, and it's not. This, at the end of April, this account will be at about 18% of where it should be, of what our total asset value is. Our objective was to get it to between 22 and 25%. Had things gone normally, we would be there in 3 years. I don't think that's going to happen at this point, but we need the money in that account to deal with the year in and year out items that have to be replaced. So let's be clear that from my perspective, and I know from John's perspective and from Steve's perspective, if you think we're going to tap into this replacement reserve account, I think you need to shift your thought process. It's not going to be appropriate, and depending on what we do here, either way, it may not be possible.
So,
And I would like to just make crystal clear that the deficit that we currently have is what we owe our reserves from what we spent 2 years ago, 3 years ago. If we tap into our reserves again this year, that is a loan to ourselves that we will need to repay. And so there's no free lunch here. And that is not a slush fund, as Larry said. Even if we had ample money in there to be able to tap into, we're still going to have to pay that back. And the only way to pay that back is getting more money out of assessments.
Doug?
Yeah, Cami?
Thank you. I appreciate all of the comments that my colleagues have made, and I think that it is certainly obvious that everyone has done their homework and the numbers are what the numbers are. And I also want to add to that the lawyer in me wants to do a lot of research, and I spent a lot of time doing that, and I can assure our people in the association that the things that you were hearing from my colleagues' thoughts are certainly true and on point. I spent yesterday going to the Bank of Ocean City, having conversations with the Small Business Association and talking to some of my lawyer friends who are involved in tax and other things. And I think it's important for our membership to understand that this PPP loan has been a very, very fluid process. It's like making law in the wilderness. No one has really known what to do. The rules have changed in the middle. And I want to assure our people in our community whom we represent that we did not go into this half-heartedly. There was a lot of research done. There was a lot of thought that went into this. I heard from people in our community, why don't we give this money back so it can be distributed into people with small businesses who really need it? First of all, the money was there, and people had certainly a good opportunity to apply for these loans. We were in the forefront, and we thought about this. And Steve Phillips made the loan application in good faith and did a great job with that. And wow, good for him. He was really, really ahead of the curve in all this. And I've thought about this, and that's why I spent so much time looking at it. I do not believe that, and Mr. Chairman, I excuse me if I'm getting ahead of myself, but I do not believe, although I originally did believe that we should give the loan back, I have come to the position after doing a considerable amount of research online and in person with these people that we do not give the loan back. And the reason is because we are qualified as a 501c4 organization to do this. And we are standing in a position, as Larry said, we cannot take money out of the reserves. That's important. If we do that, we're going to be in trouble. And so I want to assure our community that a number of us have done due diligence on this issue, and it certainly is apparent to me and to others and to other lawyers that I've talked to with the Small Business Administration that Steve Phillips wrote this grant. He did it in good faith, and I would stand by him on any day of the week.
Doug.
Other discussion?
Doug.
Go.
Frank?
Okay. I think that the best framework of this, at least in my mind, is we have to look at it and position it with the community and the homeowners two ways. We have an operating problem, and that operating problem is this. We set up a budget for this year in January and in early February, basically on the basis that conditions this year would be the same as they were last year, which showed us having a $500,000 plus operating balance. But the truth of the matter is, if you just look common sense at things happening, okay, under current conditions, any amenity is going to operate at greatly reduced capacity this year if it operates at all. And that's going to have a significant impact on amenity income. Secondly, you know, all of us got calls when the economy got ripped out from under people. And it's, I think, kind of important to position. We went from one of the best economies in our lifetime, if not in the history of the country, to a depression level economy in 90 days. That is a dramatic shift that has never happened before. We had people calling us saying literally they had the choice between paying an assessment or putting food on the table or putting medicine in the medicine cabinet. We don't know what, and we backed off and said, look, we can provide some relief out of compassion because, you know, it was just an untenable situation. But come August 1st, we don't know how much money of what we should have collected will be available. So there is a big gap on the operating side. And the question is how to address it. And the PPP loan came along, and that's possibly a solution. But the operating problem is there no matter what, and it's going to be with us for the foreseeable future if you believe just about everybody.
Hey, Frank.
Can I
Other
go?
comments?
Can I go?
Tom?
Please.
Tom?
All right. There is no question in my mind that we did everything correct and above board. I don't doubt that for a second. And there's no question in my mind that we need the money to pay payroll to keep up. And we might have to raise assessments next year, even with the money. My question is plain and simple. Are we allowed to have the money? Or is somebody going to come after us and say, hey, a 501c4 is not allowed to apply for this loan? Because from what I've read, those regulations have changed. That's the only question I have. I don't have a question about what Steve Phillips did, how he did it, and what he did. My question is simple. Are we allowed to have the money? Is somebody coming after us in May 31st and saying, write us a check plus penalty, and then we're out even more? I know we need the money. There's a possibility we have to raise assessments next year, which I promised I would never do, just because we're going to lose so much money in our amenities this year. Like Frank said, whether we open them, when we open them, the population that's going to come to Ocean City is going to be less. I get all that. That's not a question in my mind. There's no doubt how we're going to have a whole lot less income. My only question is, are we allowed to have the money? If we are, if our attorneys say we are, if they say we did our due diligence and we can keep it, because we're going to need it. No question. That's it.
Doug, let me address
Tom, if
that.
I may respond
Hold
to
on.
that.
Let me respond first.
Okay.
So when we had our discussion with the attorneys, okay, it included one of the tax attorneys in the firm of Lurch, Early and Brewer, who are our attorneys. We broached the subject with him, and they said, well, yeah, listen, the way we read the law is that when you were, quote unquote, approved, okay, not when we put this, but it doesn't really matter. You can submit the application time, but when we were approved, there was no stipulation that said 501c4s were not allowed or did not qualify for PPP, the PPP program. Okay. We then checked with the Bank of Ocean City, and we approached the same issue with them. Hey, this is several days later. We've been approved. Now all of a sudden they're saying 501c4 is not eligible. And they went back and they confirmed with their contact at the SBA, and they said, yeah, unfortunately, it's a fluid situation. But what they're saying right now is if you were approved, the terms and conditions that were in place when you were approved are the ones that take precedent, and they're not retroactive. Okay. Now, that also could change, but as of now, we have not heard anything different. So, Tom, to answer your question, we've got support from our attorneys. We got support from the Bank of Ocean City, who in turn got support from the SBA. All right. Now, that's today, May 12th. Now, if you go to May 24th, they may go back and say, you know what, we've decided to change this, and we're going to go back and look at, you know what, we are going to take anybody that we did prior to us passing the 501c4s couldn't be qualified. We're actually going to go back and get, and ask for that money back too. That could still happen. Okay. Chances are I'm not a betting man, so I'm not going to try to, give you odds on whether or not it'll happen. But we're in a very good position. We haven't committed fraud. We haven't committed any kind of egregious act that would put us in a position that we, misrepresented our environment. We were approved, and we're standing on solid ground with that. I think the key issue here is, number one, I for one thing believe we should keep it because we are going to suffer losses. And let's put it this way. The same people that are saying we should give it back right now, perhaps maybe saying when we have to raise the assessment, and I'll just make up a number, $75 to $100 next year, they'll be saying, where were you when we had an opportunity to get some money that might have softened the blow a little bit or might have helped us operationally while it was available? So we're in a sort of and I hate to use this term, but it's a lose-lose situation. But I think we can make the best of it by keeping the money and making sure we do very good planning with regard to expense control and those kinds of things. But we're also in a position where if, say, we'll use Tom's date, May 31st, they come back and change it. Hey, we repay the loan basically just that it's a 1% loan. Again, there won't be any penalties with regard to any kind of criminal activity or misrepresentation. And I think that's our risk position at this point. But no, to answer Tom's question, yes, we absolutely qualify and are allowed to use the PPP loan. Other discussion, Amy.
If I may, I want to assure Tom as well that on the day this decision was made, we were in a situation with the law where we were compliant with the law in applying for this loan. And so I do not believe, with all due respect, I would take exception to one of the comments that you made that they could come back and haunt us later. But the law was finite on that particular day that the loan application was made. I feel very confident about that. I feel very assured about that after all of the people that I have talked to. So I would say that the chances of anybody coming back to get us and said, oh, you shouldn't have done that. The argument is on the day that we applied and we were given the grant, given the loan, it was appropriate on that day and time, and the law supported us.
Doug, let me add a little bit to this too.
All right, hold on, Larry, and then Tom.
I think Cammie corrected you a little bit, Doug. The rules that applied were the rules that were in existence when we applied, not when we received notification that we got it. And when we applied, that's when there was no prohibition against a 501c4. So we're good there. And Doug knows this because he was in the discussions with us when we talked to the attorneys. We have an individual that has sent letters to the board accusing us of some committing fraud and criminal activity. And we address that directly with our attorneys, and there is no criminal intent here. So any possibility of criminal action is far-fetched. There was no intent to defraud anybody because at the time we applied, the rules were what the rules were, and it wasn't specific. And if worst case scenario, if the government says, well, you're not going to get this convertible loan is not going to be converted to a grant for you. It becomes a 1% loan, and 1% on the money we received, we're going to need the money. So at a 1% loan, we could possibly have to borrow it anyway, when right now the Bank of Ocean City is paying us 1.2% on the money we have. This money that we could possibly pay 1% on, Bank of Ocean City is paying us 1.2%. So we're actually making 0.2% if it becomes a loan.
Okay.
Thanks. Tom.
All right. Look, Cammie, I agree with you. I'm not an attorney. I read what our attorneys say. I don't profess to be an attorney. I don't profess to know how the laws work from this week to next week. But I would say this: we're in a completely fluid situation that nobody's been in before. This is all new to everybody. There is no, I'm pretty sure if we have to pay it back, it's only 1%. We don't know. If that's what we agree and think that's going to happen, great. I say keep the money. If we pay it back at 1%, we're earning 1.2. Great idea, but don't say it like it's a given. It's the government. Things can change on a daily basis. They could come in tomorrow and do something. Not that they're gonna. I'm not being a pessimist at all. I just want to make sure that we're all on the same page and not going, we might never. I can't imagine that they're going to forgive it. But I just, that was just my question. Can they come back and get it since they changed the rules? I mean, they obviously changed the rules for a reason, because they wanted to give it to more small businesses. If we have it and it was approved by the bank, it was approved by our attorneys, and it was approved by the government, I'm willing to keep it. Believe me, we need it. We got payroll. We got people here. We got to pay, and it's good. We're not going to have the income by a long stretch. So I say keep it. But I just wanted to bring that up. That was the reason. It has nothing to do with our reserves and all that, even though eventually it will. I just want to know legally, and Cammie, I appreciate your candor. It wasn't, I mean, I appreciate your opinion, because I'm not an attorney. I look at this stuff. All I do is see what I read. I don't know anything else. So that's just where I am. And I have no problem keeping the money, period. I really don't. I just want to get that out there, is my opinion.
So
Doug, if I
Doug,
may
this is Frank.
respond to Tom.
Hold on, excuse me. Cammie, go ahead, and then Frank.
Tom, I am obviously not the attorney for this association. However, as a person who is an attorney, I want to assure the group that I did my due diligence on this. And again, this has been, I think one of the attorneys that I talked to yesterday is this is like passing law in the wilderness. And this whole thing has been so convoluted, and the rules have changed on a daily basis. But I can assure you that I assured myself that on the day that we applied for this, and on the day that we were granted this PPP, that the law was in effect, that organizations who had our designation were able to reply, and I would be willing, and I'm sure our attorneys would be willing to take this to court if anything ever came up about this. And I can say that without any reservation. I felt a need to really research this. I dug into it. I spent most of the day yesterday, and I can assure you from the bottom of my heart that we did the right thing.
Thank you. Frank.
Okay, so let's kind of sum this up for the average person that's out in the association, okay? So we have applied for a Paycheck Protection Plan loan. The attorneys, the bank, and the Small Business Administration have all said what we did was in full compliance the day that we applied. We got the money. If the government does nothing different, okay, and we apply the money the way that it's supposed to apply, the way that I understand that program is that if that's used to keep people on staff for a period of 8 weeks, then that loan is converted to a grant and is, quote, forgiven, and we don't have to pay it back. Worst case scenario, the government comes back to us and they say, the day that you applied, you did everything perfectly right, so we're fine with that, but this is not going to be a grant, it's going to be a loan, and you have to pay it back, and you have to pay it back at 1% interest. So what we have to do is pay back the money at 1%, but it's a loan that we would have had to probably take out anyway to cover our operating expenses during the same time period. Is that correct?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
So, okay, so
Yeah. Well said, Frank. That really, sums it up.
end of discussion, right?
I wanted to chime in.
Other
one more
discussion.
time.
Steve?
Yeah, just, I heard a great illustration today. This whole process is like building an airplane while it's flying. And that's really, this thing is so fluid. And I think that based on all the legal processes that have been done, what was in place at the time of the application, the conversations I've had with people, I've been through this process with our church as well. I think that we should keep the money, keep the PPP loan, and stay on the horse and see where it ends up, because we don't know where it's going to end up. And nobody can predict that. But at this point, I think we just keep the money and move forward.
Other discussion? Well, let me add something. So first of all, I really appreciate everybody's input. Hopefully the membership understands that we as a team, kind of share, ideas, and we disagree and we agree and we discuss it and we debate. I call it Doug's 3 Ds: discuss, debate, decide. And it works well. One of the other things that I just wanted to touch on, and I hope I'm not turning the discussion a little bit sour, but there was a sentiment out there that, we took the money and we didn't need it, and now there's other businesses out there that are suffering, and that it's somewhat of a zero-sum game. We win, they lose. And, I just wanted to make sure that we touched on that, is that I don't know of any businesses that, are going to go under or were denied funding because Ocean Pines was approved for funding, and if that's there's no evidence that that's the case. So there were people that were thinking in those terms, and I'd just like to, ask them to consider that it's not really a zero-sum game like that. It's all about qualification. It's all about money availability, and it's all about making sure that they follow the rules of the program once the expenses are starting to run their operation. So I just wanted to make sure that, because there were people out there that were saying that, we have this slush fund. Why did we, cause other businesses to go out of business? And I think that's a little bit unfair. And quite frankly, it doesn't really kind of follow suit with how this whole process works. So, again, I think hopefully we've gotten, and I also want to thank my colleagues here. We didn't have to get into any specifics with regard to numbers and with regard to staffing. And so I was listening intently for that. So thank you for not sort of, diverting into that area. So we would have to kind of stop the discussion. So other final discussions on this. All right, seeing none, we still have an item on the floor. It's an open motion. We were in the discussion phase about going into closed session. So given that we've had a long time discussion on that, I'm going to close the floor and I'll pose the question. All those in favor of accepting the motion to go into closed sessions for the reasons stated, please signify by saying aye. We'll do a roll call vote. Myself, yes. Steve?
Yes.
Larry?
Yes.
Cammie?
Reading lips, I think that was a yes.
Cammie? Yes, okay. Tom?
Yes.
Frank?
Yes.
Colette? Colette, are you on mute?
She's muted.
Yes, I was on
Okay.
mute, sorry.
All right, so please record that the motion passed unanimously. That's it for our agenda. So I will entertain a motion to adjourn in a closed session as we agreed.
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
Okay, all those in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Okay. Directors, I will send you a meeting invite in about another minute or so for another meeting for the closed session. So please stay on your emails. I'll send you an updated link that you can, Frank and I will send it to your other email address, and you'll see a link for a new meeting in 5 minutes.
Super. Thank you.
All right.
you.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.